right, hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Moment with MoveOn. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm super excited to talk about, taxing the rich. Why is it important, and how can we make it happen? So folks are starting to join us from all around the country. Let's take a second to get to know one another. So if you can, please share in the chat your name, your pronouns, and where you're viewing the stream from. So I can go first. My name is Mohammed. You can call me MK. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be your host this evening. So let's see who's joining us. I see Anne joining us from New York, Dylan from Tucson, Allison in Minneapolis. Looks like we have folks from all around the country joining us tonight, and we're so grateful that you joined us. Whether it's supporting a candidate, fighting to pass progressive legislation, or working to change the world into one where we can all thrive, MoveOn members are committed to an inclusive and progressive future. So welcome to you, whether you're already part of the MoveOn community or whether it's your first time with us. We're so glad you're here with us tonight. We have a great program planned for today. We have Senator Elizabeth Warren, we have Alexis Goldstein from Americans for Financial Reform, and we have our very own executive director, Rana Epting. And as I mentioned, we're here today to talk about taxing the rich. As folks know, for decades, there's been a growing gap of inequality between the wealthy and the rest of us, right? And that really got put into relief last year during the pandemic, when these billionaires and these big corporations made a fortune, trillions of dollars, right? While the rest of us really struggled to get by. And why is that? It's thanks to tax policies championed by the GOP, right? Big corporations like Amazon, FedEx, Nike, they're all able to get away with paying $0 in federal income taxes because they spend millions lobbying the government to keep things the same. Well, we're not gonna stand for that anymore. We live in a society and everyone, especially those who are prospering the most, need to contribute their fair share. So we're gonna talk tonight about President Biden's American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, which will help make sure corporations and the wealthy pay more of their fair share, and other ways we can move our policies away from rewarding wealth and exacerbating inequality and making our system unfair. So I'm gonna hand it over to MoveOn's Executive Director, Rana Epting, who's gonna introduce our first guest.
Thank you, MK. Hello, everyone. As Mohammed said, I'm Rana Epting, the Executive Director at MoveOn. And more importantly, you're all of you, beautiful MoveOn community, millions of members out there that take action every day. I'm so grateful that you've joined us this evening. And I'm super thrilled to introduce our first speaker tonight, Senator Elizabeth Warren. No one has fought harder to unrig our economy, to call out economic injustice, to rein in Wall Street and large corporations. Senator Warren is a true friend and ally of MoveOn, to the progressive movement at large, to working people, to poor people, to all people, and everyone that is fighting for a more fair, a more just and equal society. So I'm honored that she's joining us here tonight and thankful every day for the work that Senator Warren does in Washington, D.C. on behalf of all of us. So thank you, Senator Warren, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Rana. It is good to be here with you.
Great. So to get us started, I have an opening question for you. Most people here understand just how bad our current economic situation is and how the structure of our economy is really rigged against working people. But I know you have your own personal story around what got you involved in economic justice. And I'm wondering if you could share maybe a formative moment you had when you were younger, when you first recognized the systemic imbalance, and like what first woke you up to the economic injustices in our country?
So that's a great question. You know, I grew up in a family that didn't have much. My daddy ended up as a janitor. My mom worked the phones at Sears. I was the first in my family to go off to college and graduate. And we struggled a lot. There was a moment we nearly lost our home. We had our car repossessed, but it was always just, that's how it was. And I never knew to question that. It's just how it was. But when I finally go on, I get my college degree, I ultimately, through a crazy series, become a law professor. I start studying bankruptcy, families that go bankrupt. And there was a common narrative about families that go bankrupt. And the narrative was that they had just been irresponsible. that they had brought this on themselves. And they turned to the bankruptcy system just to bail them out, and that Americans were just too generous toward these deadbeats and losers. So I started thinking about this as a professor, and I thought, there's no data to back any of that up. In fact, there's no data at all at the time when I was studying this, looking at why families become bankrupt. So I decided to find out why, and I team up with a sociologist, another law professor. We traveled around the country with a team of researchers, and we read court files and made copies and watched families and coded it. And what we discovered is that nearly 90% of the families who declare bankruptcy do so for one of three reasons: a job loss, a medical problem, or a family that broke apart, either a divorce or a death. But here was the thing. It's about narrative sometimes. The story about who these people were was not based in reality. It was the story the credit card companies wanted to tell. It was the story the mortgage lenders wanted to tell, because they wanted laws that benefited them, not laws that benefited the people who were in trouble. So here we are, a nation that already has this very thin social safety net. And what the rich and the powerful wanted, what the investors wanted, what a handful of giant corporations wanted, was a bankruptcy system that worked even less well for the families that were really in trouble. And here was the thing. They could afford to hire an army of lobbyists and lawyers to come in and change those laws, and the literally millions of people over time who would be affected by it, they were people who were either bankrupt or going to go bankrupt, and they didn't have a bunch of lobbyists and lawyers on their side. So for me, it was a moment that had two effects. The first was to see the horrible imbalance in how laws get made, in how stories get told, in how we think about our economy. But also, it was the moment for me when I got in the fight. And I got in the fight against those lobbyists, against those giant credit card companies and banks, on the side of working families, trying to defend them and trying to defend laws that would help those families. Now, ultimately, it was a miserable experience. I lost, and I mean big time. The bankruptcy laws got changed, and over time, millions of people have been hurt because of that, haven't been able to get back on their feet. So I feel this one deep down as something I started investing in 20 years ago to try to get help for the families who needed it. And I saw how badly broken both our economic system and our political system is. So that's part of, I went from bankruptcy to the financial crash of 2008, to Dodd-Frank and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And then, as you know, threw it all in, did a crazy thing and ran for Senate. And here I am in my Senate office tonight, while we're in here fighting about changes in the tax laws. I just came back from a finance committee markup, but that's how I see it,
And
as power in Washington.
And we're so grateful for you and your journey and the story that brought you into Congress. And we're so much better off with you as one of our leaders in this country. You know, you talked a bit about what the corporations want and what the lobbyists want. I want to talk a bit about what the people want and what Democrats in the House and the Senate and in the White House right now want to see passed. So could you break it down a little bit for us? Like, what is our current tax policy framework and who does it benefit? And then how would Joe Biden's American Jobs Plan and Families Plan help make sure that the wealthy pay their fair share?
Great question, Rana. So right now, our tax system works great if you're super rich or you are a giant corporation. And there's two parts to how it works so well for those folks: the law in the books, and then how those laws are enforced. The wealthy and the well-connected have deployed lobbyists year after year after year after year to make sure that they pay as little as possible in taxes. The big example of this was the 2017 Republican tax bill. It just huge giveaways to giant corporations, slashed tax rates for the wealthiest Americans. But these kind of giveaways weren't just that giant one that we all saw in front of us in 2017 when Trump and the Republicans rammed it through. They're sprinkled all over the tax code. Special exceptions that help hedge funds pay taxes at a lower rate, or new forms of trusts that help wealthy families shield money from taxation generation after generation. It's also about what's not in the tax code. Right now, 99% of families owe just over 7% of their total wealth in taxes. That's about what the average family pays every year. But families in the top 0.1%, you know how much they pay? About 3.2%. And in part, that's because we focus on income in the tax laws and not on wealth. So millionaires and billionaires' wealth grows and grows and grows without putting anything back in to help create more opportunity for everyone else, to help pay the expenses of running this country. That is why I've proposed a wealth tax, so that ultra millionaires would pay their fair share into the economy. So we have a tilted tax system to start with. That was part one. Then on top of that, those same lobbyists, with an assist from the Republicans, of course, have cut the funding to the IRS year after year after year. So in the past decade, the IRS budget has declined by more than 20%. The agency has lost a third of its enforcement personnel. The result is exactly what you would think. Without the money and the staff that the IRS needs, it doesn't have the resources to take enforcement actions against whom? Against the millionaires and the giant corporations that use complex mechanisms to evade taxes. Audit rates for multimillionaires have declined by 80% in the past decade. And it costs all of us. The IRS recently estimated that the gap between the taxes owed and the taxes paid could be as high as $1 trillion a year. And they estimate that the top 1% of earners account for more than a third of all the unpaid federal taxes. So we got to take action. And the president has a really good game plan here. We need to make big multi-year investments in the IRS, and we need to use that money to ramp up enforcement, not targeting poor families or middle-class families, but targeting wealthy tax cheats. That's where the money is. We need to change our tax laws so they don't reward companies for moving profits and jobs overseas. And we need a real corporate profits tax to make sure that the biggest and the most profitable corporations pay their fair share. So, Ronna, let me just summarize it by saying our tax code is not just about numbers. I know we talk about taxes and there are people who just want to fall asleep, their faces go numb. But our tax code reflects our values as a nation. And right now, this tax code is not the nation we want to be. It's a tax code that says if you're rich, we're going to help you get richer. But if you're just working people, then we're going to make it harder on you. So this is our moment. Congress has a window right now to untilt the system. And we need to get that window open, do everything we can to get tax reforms passed.
Thank you. So before we hand it over, because I know we're going to have some questions in the chat, just
Sure.
you said something that really resonated with me, which is like we can talk about taxes and people's eyes glaze over. So for the
Face gets
people,
numb.
so for the people here tonight that maybe are like, okay, tax code, IRS, I mean, like, could you paint a picture of what the implications are of our current system?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, what's on the table when we're talking about our tax laws, it's enormous. It's not just that the wealthiest have turned the tax code into a giant grift. It's that the grift harms opportunity for the majority of families in this country. Think of it this way. When we let corporations get away without paying their fair share, when we let rich taxpayers decide not to pay their taxes and just let them off, these decisions strip away revenue that would have been available to make critical investments for the public good. $1 trillion, think about that estimate, in 1 year. That's money that could end our affordable housing crisis, money that could ensure every family in America has access to high quality childcare, money to aggressively take on climate change. Nibbling around the edges of those crises is just not enough. Making the tax system fairer produces the revenue. It gets to the heart of getting us closer to the big structural changes that will actually make a difference for every person, every family, and every community. That's what's on the line.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Mohammed because I know that we have some folks that are watching that would love to ask some questions.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ronna. Thank you, Senator Warren. There's a lot of love for Senator Warren in the chat. A lot of folks saying your story resonates with them. Your constituents in there also. So one question that we have from Anne in New York is, we're always talking about how we can push back at the Republicans and push back against their policies that help the wealthy and corporations. But if we think big, what's the big ambitious vision of what our economy would look like if we had the biggest, boldest policies in place? Like, what's the utopian vision for this?
Well, I tell you what, let me do two things. Let me do it on the tax side first, since that's our topic tonight. 3 changes in the tax law. We moved to a wealth tax because, understand, income inequality in America, it's big. Wealth inequality in America, I have to drill a hole in the ceiling to be able to describe the difference. And that wealth is growing itself now. So a wealth tax, 2-cent tax on all the folks who've got more than $50 million in assets. That's a huge one. Real corporate profits tax, not after they've exploited every loophole, but a tax across the board. Way I want to do it, if a company reports publicly more than $100 million in profits, then that company has to pay a 7% flat tax on what they're publicly reporting. That's big change on individual tax, big change on corporate tax. And then the third one, let's more than double the IRS enforcement and put that money toward the top. Give them permanent funding so they can actually enforce the tax laws that exist and the tax laws we want to make. Those 3 changes will produce altogether about $6 trillion over the next 10 years. That's enough money. Now let's use it for what are the things we want to do. I'll tell you what I want to do in this country. My big vision on this is that we build an America that is sustainable. That means we've got to attack climate change head on, and a country that invests in opportunity for everyone. And that means the big investments in education and big investments in infrastructure. Infrastructure, sure, roads and bridges, but also what else it takes to be able to go to work and to be able to have businesses that can flourish. That means broadband, communications. It also means childcare and elder care. It means the things we need to invest in so everyone, including mamas and daddies, will have a chance to be able to enter the workforce, to be able to finish their education, to be able to work full time, to be able to take on a job that may have more responsibilities with it. That's the kind of America that I want to see us build. It's not complicated. I want to see a tax code that reflects our values, and I want to see us make the investments then in the things that as a people let us build a country that works, not just for the 0.1%, but a country that works literally for everyone.
So thank you so much. And I know you just have a little bit more time with us, but we have one more question from the chat. So if these rich folks and corporations have all these lobbyists, that they're using to get the tax code tilted their way, what can we do to beat them and to restore that fairness and balance that you talked about?
Oh, MoveOn. Come on. We know what to do. So here's the best part. Everything I've been talking about is very popular. The Republicans have a real problem. And that is all the things the lobbyists are fighting for and that they're all out there pushing is really unpopular. So they may have the advantages that concentrated money and the lobbying bring. And if you're helping out the rich and powerful will help you. But in a democracy, we've got each other. And there's a whole lot more of us than there is of them. What we need is we just need to raise our voices. And now we need to raise our voices around taxes. We need to raise our voices to say, we want a tax system that's fair. You've heard the pieces. Hang in there with us on taxes. And we need to raise our voices about the investments we want to see in America. We want to see real investments made on climate change. We want to see real investments made in the education of our children. We want to see real investments made in infrastructure, and infrastructure includes childcare. We raise our voices, we get stronger. This is such a moment. Change, as hard as we fight, and I know how hard you all fight, you know how hard I fight. Change is possible only when the door opens a crack. Much of the time, it's just locked and bolted shut. You just can't get change through. But think about all that has happened in the last year. We have just come through a pandemic. We are in the midst of a racial reckoning. We have seen an armed insurrection in this country, an overt attack on democracy, with the Republicans requiring a loyalty oath to the big lie. This is a moment of change. We have the opportunity I know it's a slim majority, but a majority. In the Senate, in the House, and in the White House, we've got Democrats. We've got people who fundamentally believe that government can be on the side of the people. And we've got folks who are fighting harder and harder for that. And that's happening because folks like you at MoveOn are raising your voices. So I know we all try to talk about stay in the fight, but right now, this is the moment to be in the fight, because the changes that get made in the next few months are going to be the changes that set the course for our country for decades and decades to come. So, S1, protect our democracy. I got to throw that one in. But make your voice heard on taxes, make your voice heard on infrastructure, make your voice heard on climate. We can make those differences. We can make a real change. We can do this.
Thank you so much, Senator Warren. So grateful for your time, and you couldn't be more correct. This is our moment. We fought so hard to win the election in 2020, and we cannot stop when we're so close to the finish line. Let's push it on through. So thank you very much. We know you have to get going to do other critical things.
I do. Thank you, Ronna. Thank you for having me. MK, thank you. It's good to see you, and it's so good to see all of my friends at MoveOn. You guys got us here. Help push us over the line so we can make change. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. So Senator Warren did an incredible job, as always, laying out what is at stake right now and real, live, the moment we are in, because we are in a moment. We are in a moment where we have the potential to create the change that we want, the change that we voted for, the change our nation needs, the change that we all deserve. That change is within reach with Democrats now in charge of Congress and the White House. A moment to not only build back, but to build back better. And that includes fundamentally tending to our economy to make it more fair, more just, more equitable, and more prosperous for everyone, not just those at the top. So speaking of Democrats in charge, Congress is about to take up landmark legislation, which we talked about earlier, that the Biden administration has proposed, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And in the famous words of our now President Joe Biden, these plans are a BFD. Included in these historic proposals are not only game-changing policies like paid family leave, investments in elder and child care, investments in jobs that will revitalize roads, bridges, and upgrade our transportation systems and more, but also the very topic that we're here to talk about tonight. Also included in these proposals is a plan to tax the rich, to ensure the rich pay their fair share in this country. Things have gotten so out of whack. We can see it in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our own families, so out of control economically. The rich got rich off the pandemic, and the rest of us got poorer. It is past time to tackle these crises head on. Now is not a time to settle for half measures or politics as usual in Washington, D.C. No, now is the moment we have to go big, to demand more, to finish all the work that we won in 2020 and keep on going down the field. And to do it with joy, with the courage of our convictions. Now is the time to join together again. It's the moment to ensure that those large corporations, many of those who profited, which I already said, pay more of their fair share. And this isn't some radical idea. It's called basic fairness. It's called common sense. We can do this. We must do this. And Congress is soon going to be debating all of this. In fact, they were debating some of it today. Elizabeth Warren was in the committee hearings. And they need to start hearing from us now, because here's the thing. The corporate lobbyists are already lined up. They're having meetings with members of Congress, with senators, to defeat this bill, to drown out our voices, to ensure that the status quo remains, to make sure corporations can continue to pay no taxes, to help Mitch McConnell obstruct the Biden agenda. That's what they're doing right now. And our power is when we join together, all of us, our voices. We make calls together. We write letters together to our members of Congress. When we go meet with them. When we raise money for our causes. All of this is where our power is. Passing these bills won't be easy, but nothing worth doing is ever easy. And when we do it together, we are so much stronger, so much more impactful. So now we don't just have to or must organize, we get to. We won in 2020. We have a Democratic Congress, Democratic White House. We get to organize. We get to flood Congress with calls. We get to send emails and letters. We get to engage our friends and neighbors in this fight. We get to let our representatives know that they represent us and not huge corporations, and Congress will hear our voices. And it is time to double down on the American Rescue Package and deliver urgent jobs, care, justice, climate solutions, and real democracy for all of us. And not just to recover, but to recover better, to recover boldly. And we need to invest in America again. And the rich need to start paying their fair share of taxes, because they've got to invest in America again too. So please join us. You can text TAX to 668-366. That's TAX to 668-366, or you can join us at moveon.org. Because now is not the time to rest, y'all. We get to actually win what we voted for, but we can't stop now. We got to keep charging down that field, and we got to do it together. Now's our moment. Join us. Let's seize it. Let's get this done. And I'm going to hand it back over to MK.
All right. Thank you so much, Rana, for getting us energized and laying out what's important and what we need to do going forward. So let's get some questions for Rana from the chat. I see a question here from Isabel. What are the bills and what is it that we need to support?
Yeah, so the bills are, oh, is this for me? Yeah.
Yeah.
The bills are like being written as we speak in the Senate, and we're going to hear more about them in the coming weeks. So, stay tuned. But the two packages to hear about are the the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. So jobs and families, that's what you want to pay attention to.
Right, so those are easy keywords for folks to remember, jobs and families, and look out for those plans coming to a Congress near you. So the next question we have, how do we get Senators Manchin and Sinema to see reason on the filibuster?
Ooh-wee, the $1 million question. I think the most important thing is if you live in West Virginia, or if you live in Arizona, or if you know people who do, get them to call Senator Manchin in West Virginia, get them to call Senator Sinema in Arizona and tell them enough with the silly attempts to negotiate with this Republican Party that has joined forces with those that tried to attempt a coup on January 6th, that's joined forces with those that are spreading the big lie. This is not the Republican Party of 10 years ago even. This is a Republican Party that's been co-opted by conspiracy theorists, by people that are against representative democracy. And so we have to put away those notions of negotiating and instead anchor in the fact that Democrats won, we have the majority. We should be negotiating together to pass these policies, and we can. And we need to eliminate the filibuster so that we can make true on the promise, on the mandate that people ushered Democrats into power in to win.
Awesome, thank you. One more question from the chat. What are ways that young people, like teenagers, can take further action?
You can join MoveOn.org. Sign up. I think that national organizations are an incredible way to take action, and MoveOn is one of those. Like, we really try to inform our members about what's happening on Capitol Hill, when is the right moment to take action and strike and to make your voice heard. But there's also incredible work to do at the state level and local level. Sign up for an organization in your community that you feel reflects the values, and physically in real life again, because we can do that very soon, if not already, you can participate. And it's important to act locally and act nationally.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rana. I think those are the questions that we had from the chat for this evening. So I just wanted to check in with folks in the chat. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know also if you've texted tax to 668-366. Just shout it out in the chat and let us know. Again, just take out your phone, send a message to 668-366 and send the word tax, and you'll get more information on what you can keep doing to make sure we pass these policies and these bills that tax the rich and restore fairness to the economy that we desperately need. I see Allison has texted, a couple other folks in the chat. All right, so our next guest who's joining us tonight is Alexis Goldstein. Alexis is a former Wall Street professional who now works as senior policy analyst at Americans for Financial Reform. She's a frequent commentator on the economy. She's been on MSNBC, CNN, Real Time with Bill Maher, and PBS Frontline. And she also writes on the financial markets at her newsletter, Markets Weekly, so you can check that out to get some of her insights. Welcome, Alexis, and thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So we got a couple questions for you, Alexis. just to kick it off, having spent some time working on Wall Street before spending the rest of your career advocating for economic fairness, we have to ask, like, what are some of the things that you saw down there on Wall Street?
Well, the thing I like to always tell people is the way that Wall Street talks about the economy and their role in it when they come before Congress, like they did today. There was a big bank hearing. Senator Warren gave Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, a run for his money in the hearing today. The way they talk about it is totally different than the way they talk about it amongst themselves. I think the goal on Wall Street, when you're on Wall Street talking to other bankers, is to make money, as much money as possible, to ruin your competition. And there's even a phrase that gets kicked around called ripping your client's face off. And ripping your client's face off is when you give your client a terrible deal, but your client thinks that you gave them a bargain. And that's like a goal on Wall Street, is you want to deceive people, rip them off, but let them walk away feeling like they did great. And so that's how Wall Street talks about itself among itself. But then they come to DC and say, well, don't raise our taxes. We are the engine of the American economy. And we have, they have all of these talking points. And so I always like to tell people that they're actually a lot more honest among themselves than they are with politicians, which is probably not that surprising.
Yeah, definitely not. And thanks to you and other folks who are helping, reveal the truth and show folks what's driving the economic inequality and wealth inequality that we're seeing. So, time and time again, we've seen Wall Street and corporate America come out on top whenever Congress takes up these like big new pieces of legislation, and that's usually to the detriment of working people. And this is definitely the case with the Trump tax plan. So to you, like, what does a fair, equitable, and just tax policy look like? What's like the utopian scenario that you'd like to see?
I mean, I think there's a lot of damage we need to undo. Obviously, rolling back the Trump tax scam would go a long way. I think people forget that we had very, much higher corporate tax rates for decades and decades and decades in the United States. Even under Ronald Reagan, the corporate tax rate was between like 35% and 45%. And that's the sort of like mystical, magical time that conservatives sometimes like to hearken back to. It was actually a time of, much higher corporate tax rates than we have now. I also think it's important to sort of flatten the difference between the portion of tax revenue that comes from individuals, which is very high, and the portion of tax revenue that comes from corporations. So as the corporate tax rate has gone down, 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 the sort of portion, they're not paying their fair share, as we tend to say, right? But the graph is really skewed, right? We individuals pay much more of a percentage of the total revenue that funds the government than corporations do. So I think a fair tax system would start to flatten that so that it was a little more evenly distributed. I think, like Senator Warren said, we really need a wealth tax. I think that the extreme inequality that we have in this country where, 90% of the gains in the stock market go to the top 10%, and almost half of the country has no exposure whatsoever to gains in the stock market because they don't have a pension, they don't have a retirement account. And that's because we've made policy decisions to funnel money upward. And that's, some of the changes that they made to let billionaires and millionaires pass on their money to their children and their grandchildren without any kind of estate tax. And it's policy decisions that we need to undo. So I think a wealth tax would be important, changes to the estate tax so that billionaires and millionaires don't get to, pass on money to their grandchildren and their kids without, paying their fair share. Obviously, bringing back the corporate tax rate to levels that we had in this country for decades and decades and decades. All of those things need to sort of work together. And the last thing I'll throw in there is I think there's a lot of churn in the financial markets and the stock markets, a lot of really wild speculation. And I think a financial transaction tax could sort of both, be an important tax to make it a little bit more fair and make sure Wall Street's paying its fair share, but also reduce some of the churn that is, in my opinion, really just driven by some of the most powerful players who have really high speed, frequent high frequency trading algorithms that ordinary investors buying whatever we might be buying, we don't have access to, right? So a financial transaction tax wouldn't impact ordinary investors very much to the extent people are lucky enough to be investors, but it could help even the playing field with some of these Wall Street players who have this real edge over everybody else.
Yeah, and it seems like over time that edge keeps getting bigger and bigger, right? And that's why they're able to accumulate more and more wealth and income. You mentioned a bit about like the duplicity of like what we hear from Wall Street. Yeah, like when they're in congressional hearings or what they try to sell to the public and how they act, amongst themselves. One other talking point that we hear often from them is, oh, if there's like a wealth tax enacted, it's going to tank the stock market. It's going to, destroy jobs. But you've written a lot about how, these talking points are driven by like fear mongering and simply aren't true. Can you explain a little bit more about that, like how they're able to use this like fear and manipulation to make these policies unpopular?
I mean, it's really a story of the person who cried wolf, right? It's if you do X, if you raise our taxes, if you do a wealth tax, we will go to we will move out of the city, we will move out of the country. And it's interesting, I was recently on CNBC with Kevin O'Leary, who's one of the Shark Tank guys. And he was saying, he was doing the fear mongering. He was like, if you raise the corporate tax rate, we will move, we will take our businesses elsewhere. The United States will lose businesses. Kevin O'Leary is Canadian. He used to be on the Canadian version of Shark Tank. He moved from Canada to the United States in the Obama administration when the Canadian corporate tax rate was lower than the corporate tax rate in the United States. Why did he do that? Because the US Shark Tank is more profitable for him than Canada Shark Tank, right? Companies want to be in the United States. We have a very profitable marketplace here. So much as, my banker, my fellow banker coworkers, when I used to work in banking, most of them lived in New York City, even though the taxes were higher because they wanted to live in New York City. One or two of them who had families and, wanted to live in Jersey, moved to Jersey, but most of them stayed in New York because they wanted to be in New York. And most companies are going to stay in the United States, whatever the tax policy is, because they want to have access to the American consumer. And so the best I can say is that they're crying wolf at the end of the day. And then a lot of the talking points they use about how the trickle down economics, if you cut taxes, and it'll trickle down in the economy. We have decades of evidence showing that's not true. And when the Trump tax scam passed, one of the biggest promises was people were going to bring their money from these offshore bank accounts back to the United States, and they were going to reinvest some of this money into research and development. And that did not materialize. The promises that they made about the Trump tax cuts did not come true. We have decades of evidence showing trickle-down economics doesn't work. So now we're saying, look, we know what doesn't work. Let's try what we know has worked previously, what worked in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s when it comes to tax policy. And so I just think that it's important to remember at the end of the day that a lot of these folks are blowing smoke and they're used to getting away with it, and we shouldn't let them get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't let them get away with it. And I think a lot more folks are catching on about this duplicity and some of the talking points they use not being entirely accurate. So I think now we're going to go for some questions from the chat. So I have one here. And this kind of relates to another talking point that they use, which is that companies will raise prices for consumers if taxes are higher. We also hear that, but like arguments around raising the minimum wage, right? That the costs will get shifted to the consumer. So what do you say to those talking points?
So what those ignore is the way that we shift those costs already, right? So Walmart, for example, might argue against a higher minimum wage, but Walmart is able to pay a lower wage because there is a sort of safety net in place, right? There's a huge amount of people who use TANF and SNAP and some of these government programs who work at Walmart because they qualify for these programs. And so we have public policy that in a way enables companies to pay lower wages. And so I don't think it's true that they would raise prices if there were higher taxes because they charge the price that the market will allow them to charge. It's not like they charge low prices out of the goodness of their heart and they're just waiting for some tax policy to come along and change it, right? They charge the highest price that they can charge and still have people buy their goods and services, right? Because at the end of the day, most of these companies, they're profit-making enterprises, they're trying to maximize their profits. And so they're going to charge the price that they can charge regardless of if the taxes are high or low. But again, that's another one of these talking points that they like to throw out. But I think they get away with not taking into account some of these, what we call sort of technically externalities, right? Like the cost of climate change, like companies aren't accounting for that. And we all pay for that when there's floods and wildfires, and the government pays for that. And that doesn't get factored into the cost of things, right? But that's what taxes pay for, is those sorts of bailouts when we need to put out a bunch of fires, or we need to, clean up the BP oil spill, or we need to rescue the banks. And I think it's unfair for them to say, oh, no, if you make us pay our fair share, XYZ bad thing will happen, but you should bail me out if I crash the economy. And you should make sure that we rescue the corporate bond market if there's a coronavirus pandemic. And so we're just saying, look, we're trying to make it even. We're trying to, okay, so maybe we'll rescue you when there's an emergency, but we also need to rescue the individuals on Main Street. And in order to do that, we're going to have a wealth tax, we're going to have a higher corporate tax rate. And so that's how I would respond to that.
Thank you. Actually, a related question to that last point, a lot of these Wall Street corporations and big banks, they're responsible for causing the financial crisis back in 2008 and for these impacts on the economy. So, why do corporations and big banks like that still have a say in like driving so much of our policy when we saw what the impacts were of letting them run rampant in many of our lifetimes?
I mean, I think it's a great question. I don't think they should. I mean, I think the unfortunate answer is they have a lot of lobbyists, and those lobbyists ask for a lot of meetings, and they make a lot of questions, but we all can make a lot of asks. And MoveOn is a great organization that helps let all of us make asks of our politicians too. And so I think as long as we can be just as loud as the Wall Street lobbyists, we can also try to push policy in the direction that is more fair. But, I think politicians listen to them because they're constantly knocking on their door. Of course, there's money in politics as an angle too, but I think it's a great question, and we should not let these companies that we have bailed out drive our policy decisions.
Yeah, and related to another question related to that, you talked a bit about how we're like constantly hearing these talking points from them, and it becomes like crying wolf after a while, but also like a lot of those talking points sort of become like the conventional wisdom, right? So we hear it not just from the Wall Street executives themselves, but from like, commentators and people in the media who are just like, well, this is like the way things are, right? So how do you think we could achieve like a shift in that culture from, celebrating and like edifying like the wealthy and large corporations and the rich to, a culture that's more focused on fairness and elevating that?
That is a really excellent question. And I feel like the American Jobs Plan and a lot of, these ideas about spending big on infrastructure actually is a partial answer to that question. And the reason I think that is, so what is alluring right now, right? We've had a lot of talk about GameStop, and some people made a lot of money on GameStop. Some people are doing other things in the financial markets. It's really hard to jump from one class to another in America unless you basically win the lottery in the way that some people did with the GameStop thing. And why is it that so many people see that as their only chance to jump from one financial circumstance to another, is this like big payout? Is because we've had over decades, as we've lowered the corporate tax rate, as there's been this war on supporting individuals and having a social safety net, we've made it really hard for people to get by. And I think if we can have policy like, the American, like the infrastructure plan that the president is proposing, we don't have to live on the edge. We don't have to be in this financial precarity. And then we can focus on the things that we're passionate about, right? Instead of people being like, well, I'm going to go to Wall Street because I don't come from intergenerational wealth and I want to provide for my family. Maybe if we could just provide for everyone, then we could pursue what we are more passionate about. Yes, some people are passionate about Wall Street and they'll still go there, right? But maybe we can have more people focused on things like curing cancer and finding the vaccine for whatever the next pandemic is, or figuring out whatever cool technological innovation you have. I think if you take away that economic pressure, whether it's, you trying to help yourself or you trying to help your family, people can pursue their passions. And then hopefully we would move away from this greed-centered sort of worshiping the wealthy, because I think in the way we have it now with inequality so extreme, there is this sense that like there's winners and losers and there's morality attached to money. And in my opinion, if you're wealthy, you're lucky, right? Most hedge fund managers they made a big bet and it went well. And what you don't hear about is the hedge fund managers that went a big bet and they went bankrupt. So they're not geniuses, they're just lucky, but we worship them as if they are smarter than us, and they're not. And so I think if we can provide for everyone, if we can have these sorts of plans like the infrastructure plan, hopefully we can just take the pressure down a little bit. And we won't all be so focused on like jumping from one place to another and getting that big lottery payout. And then we can think more about fairness and we can move away from the greed. But I do think, we need public policy to help us get there, because I can understand, right? We've been through a pandemic. Some people are desperate. They're trying to find a way to fix their circumstances. And that's where the government can come in and really help us. And we need to sort of push them and provide the public pressure to make the path so that they can pass the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully, thanks to the work that MoveOn members and other activists and organizations out there are doing, we can get closer to that system that's more fair, more equitable, and really provides a society where everyone can thrive and be taken care of. So I think that's it for our program tonight. So thank you so much, Alexis, for joining us and sharing your insights. If you just want to do a quick plug for where folks can follow you and learn a bit more about your work.
Sure. So I work at Americans for Financial Reform, and the best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm just at Alexis Goldstein, and I try to put all my stuff there. But it's been a real pleasure to be here with all of you. MoveOn is such a great organization. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis. All right, folks. So that is our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. If you missed it earlier, again, folks, you can text the word tax, TAX, to the number 668-366. You can learn more about our campaigns and the work that we're doing to make sure we're taxing the rich and restoring fairness to our economy. Don't forget to follow us on Twitch. And if you're not already a MoveOn member, you can become one by signing up for our SMS or email list, and we'll give you a shout the next time we have a live stream coming up. So thanks again to our amazing guests, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Alexis Goldstein, Ronna Epting, and especially to all of you watching. Thanks again for everything you do.